December 1941, a large colonial empire braces for war. The Dutch East Indies have oil, airfields, and a colonial army of over 100,000 men. On paper, they should be able to hold out, but in just 10 weeks, it's over. Japanese troops take island after island. Airfields fall. The skies belong to the Japanese Air Force. The Dutch fleet is shattered. The Royal Netherlands East Indies Army collapses. How does a colonial army that had ruled the Indonesian archipelago for decades, now defending an area the size of Western Europe, get defeated this fast? This is the story of outdated strategy, shattered command, and war decided in the air before most Dutch units ever saw the enemy. What if you were in command during World War II? In Call of War 1942, you lead a real nation in a free online PvP grand strategy game where every decision matters. Compete against up to 99 real players in massive real-time maps that unfold over days and weeks, just like a real war. Build your army from the ground up. Tanks, artillery, fighter jets, and even secret technologies like nuclear weapons. Forge powerful alliances, declare war, negotiate peace, and outthink human opponents who adapt just like you do. Whether you prefer long-term planning, intense PvP, or slow burn real-time strategy, this is war on your terms. Conquer territory, dominate continents, and rewrite history. Play anytime, anywhere on PC or mobile, fully cross-platform. Start now and claim your exclusive in-game gift, available for 30 days only. Command the war, shape the world. In early 1942, the Dutch colonial empire in Asia collapsed with astonishing speed. Within barely 3 months of Japan's first attacks, the Dutch East Indies, an archipelago stretching over 5,000 kilometers and containing vast natural resources, was lost. The Royal Netherlands East Indies Army, the KNIL, ceased to exist as a fighting force. How could such a large and strategically vital colony fall so quickly in enemy hands? Why did the Dutch, alongside with their British, American and Australian allies, failed to stop Japan? The KNIL had to defend the Dutch East Indies against the Japanese invasion, and they were joined by several thousand Australians, British and Americans. This was a considerable force compared to the 55,000 Japanese, and yet, with the exception of a few remote areas, the resistance lasted only a very short time. The Royal Netherlands East Indies Army had a twofold task: maintaining internal order and the defense against a foreign enemy. This dualism could be seen in the organization, tactics and armament of the Dutch colonial army. Small isolated units were stationed in the outer regions, buitengewesten, which were the islands beyond Java and Madura. Looking at its uniform, we see the greenish tunics with breeches and puttees. The iconic bamboo hat was replaced by the Dutch helmet, including a neck cover against the sun. Instead of issuing the standard Dutch Model 1927 helmet, the Dutch Ministry of War ordered a modified version known during development as Model B. The Ministry of Colonial Affairs ordered 45,000 helmets, but deliveries were slow. By May 1939, only 4,000 had arrived, with plans for monthly deliveries thereafter. After the outbreak of war in Europe in 1939, steel shortages and competing production demands caused major delays. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, only about 28,000 helmets had been delivered and production immediately ceased. Recognizing the growing Japanese threat, the Dutch government in exile arranged for production to continue in the United States. The Misco Saddlery Company in Milwaukee manufactured nearly identical helmets minus the Dutch lion emblem, and deliver them to the KNIL before the Pacific War, with many also issued to the Royal Netherlands Navy. Soldiers were either armed with the M1985 Hamburg bolt-action rifle or the M95 carbine and a saber. the Klewang. They were trained to maintain order and fight possible internal enemies, as they had done so during the past colonial campaigns, such as the Aceh War. The main army was the Java Army, located on Java Island, and was intended to fight a foreign enemy. It had 4 infantry regiments, 2 artillery regiments and 1 cavalry regiment. Do notice that the Royal Netherlands Navy, Koninklijke Marine, was not part of the KNIL and came under the Dutch Ministry of Defense. They had their HQ in Batavia with the main naval base in Surabaya, while the KNIL had its HQ in Bandung. The Chief of General Staff of the KNIL from 1939 was Hein ter Poorte. He later became the head of the land forces of the ABDA Command, ABDACOM, a short-lived supreme command for all Allied forces in Southeast Asia in early 1942 of the Americans, British, Dutch and Australians. The Royal Netherlands-East Indies Army Air Force ML-KNIL was prioritized and converted into 7 medium bomber squadrons, 4 fighter squadrons and 2 reconnaissance squadrons. It had 95 bombers, 99 fighters, 34 reconnaissance aircraft and 155 other aircraft. Some of its planes were obsolete by 1941 standards. North American bomber planes were ordered but were delivered too late to join the fight against Japan. A second weakness of the ML-KNIL was a lack of trained and technical personnel. Fighter pilots, for example, didn't receive formal combat flight training because there was a shortage of experienced instructors. Just as we saw with the ML-KNIL, the Colonial Land Army received its equipment too late, in too few numbers, or not at all. The KNIL was in a constant state of reorganization between 1936 and 1942. Another major weakness was the lack of support from the Indonesian people. As the 1930s came around, the political situation in the Indonesian archipelago was tense. Since the turn of the century, different nationalist groups had emerged and the Dutch colonial authorities responded with repressive measures. Many nationalists were arrested and exiled. From 1913, the Netherlands considered Japan as a potential enemy as the empire pursued political and economic expansion. In case of an attack, it was essential that the Dutch would maintain air superiority and control the sea lanes. The air arm was therefore the first line of defense, which had to prevent enemy landing ships approaching the islands. The second line was the naval arm, and the land army the third. Before the war, Dutch planners believed that geography itself would protect the colony. The vast distances, dense jungles, and many islands were seen as natural barriers. Any enemy, it was assumed, would be slowed down, exhausted and eventually stopped before reaching Java, the administrative and military heart of the colony. The Australians, allies of the Dutch, were also present in the region. In November 1941, the Australian Major G.H. Brown visited Java and attended several military exercises intended to practice offensive operations. He was not very impressed. Let's look at the Japanese. Why did the Japanese Empire attack the Dutch East Indies anyway? For almost half a century, Japan had been reliant on imported oil. This dependence was only increased by the war in China from 1937. When in June 1941 the talks between Japan and the Netherlands deadlocked, Japan realized it needed to get the oil from the Dutch East Indies by force. If that would result in war with Britain and the US, then that had to be taken for granted. So, the Japanese attack on the Dutch East Indies was part of a larger campaign that involved attacking the colonial possessions of the Americans, the Philippines, and the British, Malaya, North Borneo, and Burma, among others. The Japanese soldier of 1941 wore the tropical version of the 1938 Type 98 uniform. The standard rifle was the Arisaka Type 38 or newer Type 99 and pistols like the Nambu Type 14. The Arisaka rifle's bayonet, the Type .30 bayonet was used from the end of the 19th century till the end of World War II. However, long rifles and bayonets were outdated by 1941-42 standards. They sure made an impression on its enemy. This is what a KNIL veteran recalled when ordered to wage a final battle. Not capitulate, but fight a guerrilla war early 1942. Alright, great idea, I said to myself. We had little rifles with bayonets, while the Japanese had much longer rifles with gleaming bayonets. How are we supposed to fight them, man to man? It was madness. Japan's southern offensive, Operation Ago, was planned and executed through a joint Army-Navy system coordinated at the top by the Imperial General Headquarters. Although the Imperial Japanese Army (IJA) and Navy (IJN) were not subordinated to one another and often competed, they reached formal agreements for joint operations, enabling coordinated actions. For the invasions of the Netherlands-East Indies, the IJA committed only a limited number of elite divisions. The 16th Army, formed in November 1941, initially deployed just 3 divisions, later reinforced by 2 more. Due to shipping shortages, these units were significantly reduced in size, yet they remained highly mobile, well trained and carefully selected for tropical and amphibious warfare. The Japanese forces emphasized speed, initiative and aggressive maneuver warfare. By using tanks and trucks, they aimed for rapid road advances. Defenders were denied time to organize, often forced to withdraw under threat of encirclement. Operations followed a repeatable formula: gain air superiority, conduct amphibious and sometimes airborne landings, seize airfields, deploy air power forward, and repeat. The amphibious landings avoided the strong coastal defenses and occurred simultaneously at multiple locations, often at night. Their discipline, their cohesion, and their tactical flexibility made the Japanese counter-operations against the Dutch in 1941-42 extremely effective. Let's take a look at one of the battles that occurred during the Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies. Do notice that most battles during the Japanese attack on Indonesia were skirmishes or pitched battles at best. During the whole campaign, only 671 Japanese were killed in action, according to historian Francis Pike. In total, the Dutch lost over 2,500 men, of which a great deal were murdered in reprisals after the fighting was over or hadn't even occurred. Australian troops put up brave resistance in the east of the archipelago during the Battle of Ambon from the 30th of January to the 3rd of February. They feared a Japanese attack on their territory, something that was being discussed in Tokyo. In February 1942, the Australian coastal town of Darwin was bombed by the air by Japanese aircraft. On the island of Ambon, 6,000 Japanese faced 3,000 Allied troops, 400 Dutch, 1,400 indigenous troops, and 1,200 Australians. One indigenous soldier later recalled. I was assigned to the airport alongside Australian soldiers. We had ordinary rifles and the Australians had machine guns. But even with those, they were almost as helpless as we were. The Japanese force was overwhelming. They had many more fighter planes. We had 2. And their ground troops surprised us from behind. There was a lot of shooting at the airport that day. Everyone fled back home to the mountains. Some of us even wanted to hop on a boat to Australia. After the Japanese claimed victory, they beheaded 60 Dutch and 260 Australian soldiers. The Japanese would establish a POW camp on the island in which conditions were brutal. Ambon was among the bloodiest of the Japanese POW camps, where many Allied POWs, mostly Australians, met their fate. So far we have named different causes why the Japanese advance happened so swiftly, yet we haven't touched on the most important one: air power. In mid-February 1942, the situation for Japan was as follows. The American and British navies were still severely damaged. Indochina and Thailand were under Japanese control. The Philippines and the Malay Peninsula had been largely conquered and the attack on the Dutch East Indies was in full swing. The most important airfields and oil wells on Sulawesi, Borneo, South Sumatra and Ambon had been occupied. The reconstruction of the destroyed refineries began immediately. The most important Allied centers, however, Singapore and Java, were still in Allied hands. Singapore was considered impregnable, and Java, according to some, would become a second North Africa, a place where the enemy would bite to dust and the tide of war would turn. But then, on the 15th of February, Singapore fell. Dutch historian P.C. Boer, who wrote The Loss of Java, claimed the loss of the Indies was a matter of air power. Most planes went to the defense of Singapore and couldn't be deployed in the Indonesian archipelago. Despite the Allies not being heavily outnumbered in manpower, they were outnumbered when it came down to air power and also naval power. From the 18th to the 27th of February, the fight for air supremacy over Java was fought. This mostly took place in the airspace above South Sumatra and Bangka, with an attrition strategy, the Allied Air Force trying to hit two main Japanese targets: the supplies of aviation fuel near Palembang on Sumatra and the Japanese fighter planes that were stationed near the same city. By hitting these targets, the Allies hoped to prevent the Japanese from gaining air superiority and delay their landings on Java. The Allies managed to destroy 135 Japanese aircraft. More time was needed to inflict more damage on the Japanese Air Force, but time was lacking as the Japanese invasion fleet was on its way. The Japanese Navy didn't want to delay the invasion of Java, and thus the Japanese never achieved full air dominance during the initial phases of the battle for Java. On the 27th of February, the naval battle, the Battle of the Java Sea, took place. Led by Rear Admiral Karel Doorman, the Allied fleet suffered a decisive defeat at the hands of the Imperial Japanese Navy. On the night of the 20th of February to the 1st of March, the Japanese landed on Java on 3 different points. 2 main battles would be fought on Java: the airfield of Kalijati between Bandung and Batavia. This airfield was located fairly close to the coast. A small Japanese detachment landed at Eretan Wetan and managed to capture the airfield. The KNIL tried to retake the base without any success. With the airbase in Japanese hands, the Allies lost many British bomber planes and the Japanese were able to gain air superiority. Yet, on the ground, the Japanese here were in the minority. Nevertheless, they pushed for Bandung, and from the 5th to the 7th of March, the Battle of the Chiater Pass took place. Using air superiority and better training than their KNL counterparts, Japanese soldiers successfully stormed and captured the undermanned defensive positions guarding the pass after 3 days of fighting, securing their path to Bandung after capturing the town of Lembang. The Dutch armed forces, on the other hand, were demoralized by constant air raids and the intensive fighting. The next night, Governor General von Starkenborg-Stachauer and Lieutenant General Ter Poorten arrived at Kalijati, where Japanese commander Hitoshi Imamura awaited them. Initially, the Dutch didn't want to surrender the full archipelago, but under Japanese pressure did so. Of the 114,000 KNL soldiers, the vast majority were Javanese, Manadonese, Ambonese, Timorese, and from the other regions. In 1929, only 20.76% had European status. In 1941, when conscription for Indonesians was finally introduced out of necessity, the percentage must have been even lower. From the outset, the senior cadre was predominantly European, with Indonesians being deployed outside their region of origin. These measures betrayed the realization that it was not self-evident to fight against your own countrymen, not to defend the interests of the colonizer at all times. And that simple truth took its toll when war broke out, as many deserted. Don't forget Call of War 1942 with its free online PvP strategy set in historic World War II global warfare. Fight real players, plan your strategy and conquer the world. Click the link in the description. Get an exclusive starter pack including new loot boxes with a chance to unlock the Marines unit worth $25 US. This offer is valid for the next 30 days only. Go on an epic adventure by clicking the link in the description. Looking at the bigger picture, the KNIL was the third line of defense after the Air Force and Navy. The Land Army was not more than a police army, perhaps able to crush inland rebellions but not to fight against a foreign invader. They were hopelessly under-equipped, also due to austerity cuts, and the Indonesian archipelago was simply too big to defend. The Japanese used bold tactics, and the KNIL therefore stood no chance. We must also not forget that the Japanese were gravely underestimated. One Dutch sailor who survived the battle for the Java Sea later recalled this: "We had always underestimated them. We'll fix them." No, they fixed us. It was Dutch arrogance that did us in. We always know best. We can always do it best. But really, the others are just as good, if not better. Our problem is our supremacy. Check my video on the full Dutch East Indies campaign by clicking here. Thanks for watching.